the next graph we're going to look at isn't sine of x, but it's going to be cosecant of x. But before we begin with cosecant, it's really important that I be able to graph sine. Now we're going to graph just the basic cosecant function. Anything else, any other changes would simply take place in graphing the sine of x. So cosecant of x and sine of x are, of course, reciprocal functions of each other, and they really do play a part in graphing each other. So when I'm going to graph cosecant of x, I first need to graph the sine of x with all the same changes. If there was an amplitude change or a phase shift or anything like that, I'm going to graph it as if it were sine of x. And I go ahead and I make that a dotted line. As you can see here, I've already got sine of x graphed, and that's going to make my pattern, I guess you could say. We're going to use this as a template. Now, something that we do want to do is at every intersection of the x-axis, we draw a vertical asymptote. So at the zeros, we're simply going to draw a line. Now I'm going to make these lines dotted because I want them to be not part. They're really not part of my graph. And so you can see here, there's an asymptote. You got an asymptote right? No, not right there. An asymptote right about here. These are just kind of guidelines. Of course, there's an asymptote right through the x-axis or through the y-axis. There's another asymptote right here. And then the last one is right over here. Okay. Now these are kind of guidelines to help me, to guide me in graphing it. The next thing I want to do is make a point at the minimums and maximums of each graph. And my mouse is getting funky. Point here. There's a point here. And a point right about here. Now once I've got these points labeled, in order for me to graph the cosecant, I've got my boundary lines with my my lines drawn, my asymptotes. I've got my vertices at these points here. So what we're going to do is I'm going to go ahead and graph. Okay, we'll do it the old-fashioned way. 1 divided by sine of x. Or not. There we go. Sine of x. And I'll click OK. And you can see as the graph, if I cannot move it, as you can see the graph, the parabolas that we just drew stay in between our asymptotes, and they go through that point. So basically, it's a three-step process. I first have to graph sine of x. I have to label the asymptotes. The asymptotes are exactly where cosine or sine of x goes through the midline. So if there's a vertical shift, they still would go through the midline, wherever the graph crosses the midline, just like it would be here. Okay, and then I label the minimums and maximums at each point, and then I draw in my parabolas as you see here. And that's all there is to it.